Well, welcome to a new episode of Trending Topics with BB. I am your humble host, Brooke Brown, hence the BB. And as you can hear, you might be able to hear, there's a fan in my background. It's just too hot here in Arizona for me to not turn that off. So I apologize if you hear that any background noise, but it's necessary. So this is an episode, a very special episode. It's another solo episode. What I wanted to do for those out there is kind of update what's going on with the podcast coming up and to kind of give some personal updates, talk about a few things, and give a rundown. So, first and foremost, this coming Tuesday, July 20th, is another live episode like this one you're watching or listening to or will listen to on the podcast. Yes, I got a haircut, so my hair is a little weird today. But anyway, there's a new episode coming up. It's part 3, the final part of my 3-part series featuring my good friend Marissa Thompson. She is also a blockhead, a fan of the New Kids on the Block. We are actually going to Boston together for the upcoming Fenway Park show featuring New Kids on the Block and BBD, Belle Biv DeVoe, and special guests. So that'll be Tuesday. We're going to have a little fun chat, and it'll be my final episode of that series. So hopefully you tune in live and check that out. If not, it'll be available on the podcast feed, and you'll be able to check it out replay on my Twitch channel and my YouTube channel. Also, all of this information can be found via the link, which is on the screen right now. And if you're listening, it is the official website. It is trendingtopicswithbbpodcast.com. There is a lot of information about the podcast on the website, the official website, along the lines of new episodes. There's a whole page of wherever to find the podcast because it keeps being picked up by any podcast platform that I can find. And also, you can check out the merch. Now, I do want to talk about the merch today in this live stream because starting today and this weekend, you can get a discount on the podcast merch from tpublic.com. If you just go to trendingtopicswithbbpodcast.com/merchandise, there's another link that'll take you to the store. But all t-shirts are $13 and everything else in the store is 35% off. And the reason I bring up the merch is that it would be helpful not only to spread the word about this podcast in some form, but also proceeds from sharing or buying the merch comes back to help keep this podcast afloat. And the reason I am giving all this information because I'll explain to you some upcoming updates with me personally and this podcast so that those that do look forward and download these episodes as they are released or will check this out in syndication or video and audio replay in the future will understand where I'm coming from. So please support the podcast through that. I've tried sponsors. I've had sponsors here and there over the years, but really I've done this podcast out of the love of wanting to learn from people I talk to on this podcast, as well as to just get things off my chest in my soapbox episodes or talk about all the other pop culture stuff that I'm into, such as streaming various TV shows, as well as the music. And also just a big thing about my company that this podcast is under, which is BB Media Industries, is to highlight those that may not be highlighted. They're talented people out in the world, and I feel like the more that I highlight via being guests on this podcast, the better we are in terms of sharing talent throughout the world. So this is what leads me to some updates about the podcast. So as I mentioned at the top of the podcast, the next episode is Tuesday. And then I'm going to take another hiatus. I have another creative endeavor that has been building in me for years. I actually spoke about it on this podcast in a previous episode, I think a couple years ago. I'm not going to say specifically, but I've started, well, I will announce that I'm going to add author to one of my traits, I guess you could say. I've started writing a book. And I'm really excited about it because it's been brewing in my head for many years, probably 10 to 15 years, to be honest. And I just feel like I had thought about doing a TED Talk or applying to be in a TED Talk because, as you see in the shirt I'm wearing today, it's Ignite Phoenix, which is, side note, a small kind of like TED Talk event that happens in Phoenix, Arizona, that was started by some wonderful entrepreneurs slash creators in the area many years ago. And about 5 or 6 years ago, I was selected to speak. They're 5 minute, kind of like TED Talks on a topic. And my topic then I've mentioned on the podcast, and it kind of goes with a lot of the guests I've had on this podcast and a lot of the topics I've talked about. But my topic in Ignite Phoenix was uh, electronic music, electronic dance music. So I spoke. I gave a 5 minute talk about kind of the history, which is hard to like narrow down all the information. But I talked about my love of finding this music through my love of like freestyle music, leading up to other artists that have been mentioned on this podcast or even interviewed on this podcast. So basically, the reason I thought about it is that after doing that experience, and it's such a great experience, and then I've also volunteered at a few of since I spoke at Ignite Phoenix, I thought, well, this topic that I've had on my brain for a long time, maybe I should apply for a TED Talk. But it's hard to apply because in the rules that I've been researching in TED Talk, you actually kind of have to be nominated by your community. And with what happened in the last year with COVID, TED Talks right now are more likely virtual, which is great, just like a podcast. But I don't think right now they're kind of virtual, and some are maybe planned. And obviously, it's well known, and the joke on social media is like, "Welcome to my TED Talk," or "Thank you for listening to my TED." It's a joke because everybody's turned a TED Talk into a rant. But I decided instead of applying or trying to rally everybody to that I'm just going to write a book. And I've also thought about turning the book, after it's a published book, into maybe a screenplay and maybe selling it in Hollywood. But that's going to be probably a few years down the road because I got to get the book written and published and funded and all that stuff, which the reason why I'm explaining this before I'm not going to announce what the topic is that I'm writing about yet. Although, if you're good at research and you listen to all of my episodes or go back, you may figure it out. Because I shouldn't give you this hint, but it's a recent one that I just published on my YouTube. Anyway, because I see you viewers out there, I should give you a shout outs in 1 second. Thanks for tuning in, Diana. Yeah, so I'm going to take some time off, not only for mental health, because let's be honest with this podcast, I've been doing this for almost 9 years. And I love podcasting. I love talking to people. But the problem that I'm running into right now, that it's been apparent this year, because I took an early hiatus a couple months earlier in this year, is that I'm not only something that I love to do and that's been my hobby for so long, because I really haven't made any money, let's be honest, from this podcast. It just kind of goes back in to all the stuff that I needed, all the equipment that I have bought over the years, not only the hosting and all that good stuff, but is that I'm finding that I've reached out to a lot of guests, and for some reason, a lot of guests, instead of just saying when I've reached out to the guests initially, hey, no, I'm not interested in being a guest on your podcast, I'm increasingly getting people that will say, yeah, I want to be on your podcast. Let's set it up. Or maybe down the road and then circle back months later. Then they're either ghosting me where they're not responding to my follow-up emails or social media requests, which life is life, and with the last year we had, I understood, but it's kind of a psychological thing for me to keep doing when I don't believe in this day and age, specifically with the internet and all of our ability to be our own content creators, even with Hollywood and celebrity and influencing life, that we aren't more equal. I think that we're more equal as content creators now than we ever been, because there's just platforms like this, my podcast, Restream, anybody's social media, you name it. And I just don't understand why, no matter who you are, you think you're above somebody else, or you're looking to get more out of it than is initially proposed. To be honest, it's been hard to get some of the guests that I've had on this podcast, because it's taken years of me actually convincing their publishers, their managers, you name it, that my little podcast is worthwhile for them to be on, like they're doing me a favor. And to be honest, have felt that it's like a mutual favor thing. It's not one or the other. I think, yeah, I'm not the biggest podcast, and I'm not the biggest celebrity that has a podcast, but I feel that if I want to have a conversation with you, that whatever you may do is I find intriguing. I want to learn from you. I want to get your word out there. I want to support you. And I was, so basically, sorry, I lost my train of thought, but thank you, Diana, for the support out there. So basically, it's been building for a while. For the last month or so, obviously, I wanted to I knew that coming up on the concert that I'm going to be going to in Fenway and the vacation I'm taking, that I kind of wanted to do a few episodes leading up to it, which also kind of relate to the book I'm writing. And when I announce the book, you'll understand why. But why not add author? To be honest, I have a bachelor's in communication, and if I really took my work from college seriously, I probably would have been published at this point, because I wrote so many essays and papers throughout college, both in English and Spanish, because that was my minor, Spanish, that, I could have been published by now. But I think I was just so burnt out from my college experience, which was now probably like 13 years ago. But anyway, so I'm really interested in the topic. The topic's been brewing in my head. I basically wrote it in my head. I can speak it better right now, but it's going to take me a while to get it out on the words. However, I have already started writing, and I already have written 1,000 words. And that's just the intro, basically, of the book. So it might be a long book. But first of all, I'm going to write it, start editing it, take time off of the podcast. I may do new episodes coming up, just sporadically pop-up episodes if, people reach out to me to be on the pod. I've had some people, I've had like a couple people, and I am part of the Pod Match community, which is an app that does connect podcasters, but we'll see what happens with that. Right now, I just need to take some time off from the podcast. So after this next episode, which is on Tuesday, this next week, sorry, I had to read your comment. Yeah, I might change it to a seasonal podcast where I do bank some episodes and release them in a seasonal instead of doing episodic. I don't know. I mean, this is episode 144, and Tuesday will be episode 145. So I'm almost to 150 episodes over 9 years, which seems like a lot, but doesn't seem like a lot because I haven't had the time to podcast like some of these people out there that can over the years because I've had to have day jobs. So I don't want to completely quit the podcast. I've mentioned that maybe if you're part of my, part of the BBB Media Industries Facebook group, I kind of mentioned something about ending the pod, but I don't think I want to end it altogether. I think I've put too much work and had learned so much about podcasting and doing this over the years that I don't think just putting this will do. But also, if you're not aware, I actually have another podcast called Sports Chat Podcast that I started because I used to have an old TV show that's also on my YouTube called sportschat.tv from back in the day, and where I interviewed people in the sports world and talked about sports. And there was a time where I loved sports, and that ended in its form. And then I decided to kind of start a new era of Sports Chat podcasts. A couple years ago, I recorded 2 episodes with a guest co-host. Since then, our lives have gone elsewhere, but I feel like bringing that back, and it's kind of hard for me to do both podcasts. So taking time off of this one that I've focused so much time and effort on over the years, and to write my book in my off time, and to maybe record new episodes of Sports Chat podcasts. It's kind of what's going to be happening. And I can't thank all of my guests enough that have been on the pod so far. Some that have been recurring, some that have had multiple appearances, and some that I didn't think I was ever going to get on my podcast. And they were some of the early adopters, basically, of my podcast. So definitely, if you head to the website that I have, if you're watching this live or will watch this in syndication, trendingtopicswithbbpodcast.com, or if you're listening, you'll notice on the social media feeds, if you go back, you might be surprised by some guests, or feel free to go back in the archive of the episodes. I mean, in this time off, I would hope you would spread the word and leave a favorable rating or comment wherever podcasts are found. That way other people can discover this podcast. To be honest, I'm almost to 10,000 downloads on my host, which is a milestone for me. I'm over almost to 9,000 as we speak, but considering the sporadicness of me releasing episodes over the years and just getting my sound correct and my equipment correct, I'm actually proud of that milestone coming up. So if anybody that listens to this, spread the word. I know there's a million podcasts out there, legit, but it helps. And also supporting any way you can to the merch. But also, so to get back to why I'm taking time off, I may probably announce a little bit more information about the book later. I don't know. I'm trying to figure it out because it's not cheap to get published, which is probably why not a lot of people do, or the people that do get published are celebrities and politicians and PhD authors. Not a PhD, just I'm going to write a book on the perspective of a certain topic that I've had personal experience with. And it's kind of not really a how-to book, but kind of like a book based on somebody who's experienced it. And I hope it's relatable, but I also hope it doesn't come across as... Anyway, so this is kind of the news and updates that I wanted to share on this episode. Kind of take an episode off of basically interviewing guests, which I've loved, but I need some time off for my mental health, which is something I've talked about on this podcast many times. Mental health is important, but feeling this burnout from this podcast, which is something that I've loved, which is not my day job, which is a whole nother story, I feel is necessary. But I don't want to end it completely. So this is kind of more of a I'll see you soon warning, or I'll talk to you soon wherever you listen or watch this, coming up with the podcast. And also just really to shout out, kind of update, because I don't really, what I've noticed over the years with my podcast is that I focus so much on my guests, or so much on the topic that is being discussed, which I call it strict trending topics with BB for a reason, that I felt that I haven't really, other than my soapbox episodes when I get on a rant about a topic, I haven't really shared specifically a lot personally on this podcast, which maybe could be a reason that I'm burnt out. I don't know. Wow, my eyes are bad tonight. Oh, thank you, Diana. I appreciate that. It's funny. As much as the topic of mental health has been brought up in recent years, I just hate the stigma. And if anybody knows, this green bracelet that I have is actually it's associated with mental health. It's Stamp Out Stigma. If you go to Stamp Out Stigma, their Twitter or their website, you can get yourself a bracelet. But it's basically to end the stigma of mental health, because I've had issues in the past, kind of getting to the point now where I'm aware of my diagnosis, of really kind of what I need to do as an adult now. But I'm also a proponent of helping others, because I'm one of the lucky ones where I didn't get, it's not a tragic story, but it was almost there once many years ago. So I'm now part of, I wouldn't say an activist, but if there shouldn't be a stigma, it's like you've seen on social media or on the internet a million times by your favorite celebrity. It's okay to not be okay. And also, it's okay to get help in any form. And if it's too expensive for you, there's a lot of resources out there that actually don't require a lot of money. Specifically, well, for those who are watching, my day job right now that I'm in, one of the benefits and wellness that they do in corporately is that they've integrated a program that if you're an employee, you get free access to Headspace, which is an app that helps with meditation and all kinds of help in terms of just keeping you in a good headspace. And so I've been using that, not as often as I should, but if you look into, some people may not know that there are resources even with the job you have. So I would definitely check out places with some platform or something where you can find out if there is either free subscriptions or they reimburse you for keeping your health and wellness up. I highly suggest it. I don't think a lot of people have taken advantage of it. because it's not always broadcast. Basically, throughout it. I mean, honestly, you know about your health benefits or monetary benefits, but excuse me, you forget about any programs like that a lot of companies are integrating and collaborating with because it just gets lost in the shuffle. So my PSA, my public service announcement is if you're feeling like you need some sort of help other than just reaching out to family and friends, look into possible resources through your job. I mean, if they're willing to pay for it or pay half of it or reimburse you, whatever it may be, take advantage of it. I know a lot of companies have bereavement, which hopefully a lot of people took advantage of in the last year. Not to make light of that, but there's that. And mental health is just as important as physical health. So anyway, so mainly as I've almost gone longer than I wanted to speak, I just wanted to kind of update those that do support this podcast, and I can't thank you enough, listeners and watchers out there, for your support, as well as my guests over the years. But I'm going to take some time off and write a book, evaluate a lot of other things in my life, but also just take some time off because I need a vacation come up. Hopefully, we'll see if things don't get postponed again due to the current headlines today. But I think that is kind of what I wanted to explain. Again, if you haven't just logged on to the official website, please do so. I update that every time there's an episode published, as well as just constant. It's not the best website, but it'll do for now. So thank you, Diana, for your comment. I appreciate it. Likewise. And anyway, so without further ado and more lag, I want to thank everybody who's tuned in and watching this, and everybody who supports this podcast. And I will see you this coming Tuesday for the finale of a series of episodes, as well as just episodes for a while. And thank you for tuning in and listening, and I will talk to you then. Have a great evening, morning, afternoon, wherever you're listening to this. And be well, everybody.